The worst kind of regret is realizing the person you betrayed never needed to prove anything to you in the first place. The ballroom shimmered beneath golden chandeliers as Manhattan's elite moved through the Grand Astoria Hotel with quiet confidence, their designer shoes gliding across polished marble floors while waiters carried champagne on silver trays worth more than most people's monthly rent. Claire Bennett adjusted the strap of her black evening dress and forced a professional smile at a wealthy investor asking where the VIP section was located. But her attention kept drifting toward the massive stage at the center of the room, where a glowing screen displayed the words Entrepreneur of the Year. Outside, rain streaked down the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Park Avenue, turning the city lights into blurred rivers of gold and white. The orchestra played softly. Crystal glasses clinked. Expensive watches caught the light every time someone lifted a hand. Everything about the night smelled like power. Old money, new money, success polished until it looked effortless. Claire had spent the last 2 years building a career around events like this, learning how to smile at people richer than entire zip codes, learning how to stand perfectly still while men with billion-dollar portfolios spoke over her like she was part of the furniture. But tonight felt different. Strange. Heavy somehow. Her chest tightened as one of the hotel staff rushed past carrying a headset and whispered urgently into another employee's ear. He just arrived. The mood in the room shifted instantly. Conversations lowered. Several executives straightened their jackets. Even the photographers near the stage suddenly moved faster, adjusting lenses toward the ballroom entrance. Claire frowned slightly. Whoever this CEO was, people were acting like royalty had entered the building. Then the doors opened. A tall man stepped inside beneath the soft rain-soaked glow from the lobby lights. Dark charcoal suit. Black overcoat draped across one arm. No flashy entourage. No arrogant smile. Just calm silence. The kind of silence powerful men carried without trying. Claire's breath stopped. The champagne glass slipped from her fingers before she even realized she had lost control of her hand. It shattered against the marble floor, sharp enough to silence the nearest conversations. Because the man standing at the entrance was Ethan Walker. Her Ethan. Or at least the version of him she used to know. 2 years ago, Ethan had worn thrift store sweaters and worked from a tiny apartment with unreliable heat somewhere in Brooklyn. He drove a beat-up Honda Civic with a passenger door that rattled every time it hit 40 miles an hour. He drank cheap coffee, forgot haircuts, stayed awake until 3 in the morning staring at lines of code while telling her softly, "I'm close, Claire. Just give me a little more time." Back then, she thought he was wasting his life chasing impossible dreams. Back then, she thought ambition looked like expensive suits and rooftop parties and men named Ryan who ordered 18-year scotch without checking the price. But tonight, the entire ballroom turned toward Ethan Walker like gravity itself belonged to him. Claire felt cold all at once as photographers rushed forward in a storm of camera flashes. Ethan paused briefly near the entrance, rain still clinging faintly to his dark hair, and for one terrifying second, his eyes found hers across the crowded ballroom. No anger, no bitterness, no satisfaction, just quiet recognition. Then he looked away. Somehow, that hurt more than hatred ever could. Claire could still hear the sound of the champagne glass breaking long after the ballroom music returned to normal. Tiny shards scattered across the marble floor like pieces of a life she thought she had buried 2 years ago. One of the hotel servers rushed forward with a towel, apologizing softly, but Claire barely heard him. Her eyes remained fixed on Ethan as he moved through the crowd with effortless calm, while executives twice his age hurried to shake his hand. It made no sense to her. Not completely. Not yet. Because the Ethan she remembered used to fall asleep at his desk wearing faded sweatpants with cold takeout containers stacked beside his laptop. The Ethan she remembered once counted quarters at a laundromat because his debit card had declined 3 times in 1 week. Back then, ambition looked messy on him. Exhausted. Invisible. Claire swallowed hard and stepped away from the broken glass before anyone noticed how pale she had become. Across the ballroom, Ethan stopped briefly beside a silver-haired investor who smiled like he had just found gold buried beneath Manhattan. Cameras flashed again. Someone near the stage whispered, "That is him. Walker Technologies. The defense contract guy." Another voice answered quietly. "He made $4.8 billion before turning 33. Claire felt her stomach tighten. 4.8 billion. The number sounded unreal. Too large to belong to someone she used to split grocery bills with inside a 600-square-foot apartment above a noisy deli in Brooklyn. 2 years earlier, Ethan had lived inside a world of unfinished dreams and glowing computer screens. Every night, the apartment smelled faintly like burnt coffee and overheated electronics because his old laptop fan barely worked anymore. Claire remembered sitting on the edge of their bed one winter evening while snow tapped softly against the fire escape outside the window. Ethan had been typing for hours without speaking, dark circles beneath his eyes, his glasses slipping slightly down his nose while lines of code reflected across his face. "Do you ever stop working?" she had asked quietly. Ethan smiled without looking up. "Not yet." "For what exactly?" she pressed. "Because honestly, Ethan, I do not even know what this thing is anymore." He finally turned toward her then, tired but hopeful in a way she had not appreciated at the time. "It is a security platform," he explained gently. "Artificial intelligence for threat detection. If it works, companies can prevent cyber attacks before they happen." Claire remembered staring at him in silence. At the time, his words sounded like every impossible startup dream New York was full of. Every broke genius promising the future, while overdue rent notices sat unopened on kitchen counters. She wanted certainty, stability, a life that looked successful now instead of maybe someday. And slowly, without realizing it, she began comparing Ethan to everyone around her. Men in expensive suits. Men who reserved rooftop restaurants weeks in advance. Men who looked finished instead of still becoming. That was when Ryan entered her life. Ryan Parker, 38 years old, senior broker at a Manhattan investment firm. Perfect haircut, gold cufflinks, a penthouse overlooking Central Park with floor-to-ceiling windows and a wine collection displayed like museum art. Ryan knew exactly how to make success look effortless. The first time Claire met him at a charity networking event, he glanced at her name tag and smiled confidently. "You do not belong serving drinks at these things," he had said smoothly. Claire laughed nervously back then. She should not have. Because compliments from men like Ryan felt dangerous precisely because they sounded like rescue. Slowly, the distance between her and Ethan widened in tiny invisible ways. She stopped asking about his work, stopped waiting awake for him at night, started noticing the rattling sound Ethan's old Honda made every time he parked outside their building. One rainy Thursday evening, Claire stood near the apartment window watching headlights blur through the wet Brooklyn streets, while Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor beside his laptop, completely absorbed in another endless night of work. "Ryan invited me to the Hamptons this weekend," she said carefully. Ethan looked up immediately, not angry, just surprised. "Ryan?" Claire crossed her arms defensively. "The broker I told you about." Ethan nodded slowly. Silence settled between them while rain tapped softly against the glass. "Do you want to go?" he finally asked. Claire looked at him then, really looked at him. The wrinkled hoodie, the tired eyes, the man still chasing something nobody else could see yet. And for the first time, she wondered if loving him meant choosing a harder life forever. Claire never answered Ethan that night. Not directly. Instead, she turned back toward the rain-streaked window and watched yellow taxi lights move through the wet Brooklyn streets below, while silence slowly filled the apartment between them. Somewhere outside, a siren echoed faintly through the city. Inside, only the soft clicking of Ethan's keyboard remained. That sound used to comfort her. It used to mean he was building something, trying, believing. But lately, all she heard was distance. "It is only a weekend," Claire said finally, keeping her voice calm. "Ryan invited a few people out there." Ethan studied her quietly for a moment. There was no accusation in his expression, no jealousy either. Somehow, that almost made her more irritated. "Do you want me to tell you not to go?" he asked softly. Claire crossed her arms tighter. "I want you to care." Ethan looked down at his laptop screen again, though his fingers had stopped typing completely. "Claire," he said carefully, "I do care. About your work, yes." The words escaped sharper than she intended. About coding. About investors. About some future that may never even happen. Ethan inhaled slowly, exhaustion flickering behind his eyes. "Everything I am doing is for our future." "That is the problem," Claire whispered. "Everything is always about the future with you. Never now." The room fell silent again. Ethan had never been good at arguing. He was the kind of man who listened too long before speaking, who searched carefully for honest words instead of throwing angry ones around just to win. Ryan was different. Ryan filled silence instantly, confidently, effortlessly. Around Ryan, Claire never had to wonder where she stood because he made certainty look easy. That frightened her more than she admitted. The weekend in the Hamptons arrived wrapped in sunlight and expensive perfume. White yachts floated against deep blue water, while women in oversized sunglasses laughed beneath striped umbrellas beside infinity pools larger than Ethan's entire apartment. Claire stepped out of Ryan's black Mercedes feeling underdressed even in the nicest outfit she owned. Ryan noticed immediately. "Relax," he said with an easy smile, resting one hand lightly against her back as they walked toward the beach house. "You belong here more than half these people do." Claire laughed softly, though her stomach twisted at the words. Belong. She had not realized how badly she wanted to feel that until recently. Throughout the weekend, Ryan moved through rooms like someone born for wealth. He knew the right wines, the right investors, the right stories. Men respected him instantly. Women admired him openly. And every time Claire checked her phone, she saw another unread message from Ethan sitting quietly on the screen. "Hope your weekend is going well. Do not forget your umbrella tomorrow. They said rain is coming Sunday night. I made coffee before you left. It is still in the fridge if you want iced coffee when you get home." Small messages. Gentle messages. The kind that suddenly felt painfully out of place beside champagne dinners and oceanfront balconies worth $20 million. Sunday evening, Claire stood alone near the edge of the beach while cold wind rolled off the Atlantic Ocean and waves crashed softly beneath the fading pink sky. Ryan approached carrying 2 glasses of wine and handed her one. "You are quiet tonight," he observed. Claire forced a smile. "Just tired." Ryan studied her carefully before speaking again. "You know," he said casually, "I looked up your boyfriend." Claire stiffened slightly. "Why?" Ryan shrugged. "Curiosity." He sipped his wine slowly. "Tech startup guy, right?" Claire nodded once. "Something like that." Ryan gave a faint amused smile. "Claire, I work around investors every day. Men like your boyfriend are everywhere in Manhattan. They talk about changing the world while borrowing money for subway fare." Claire stared toward the darkening ocean without answering. "You are smart," Ryan continued gently. "Beautiful too. You could have stability. A real future. Instead, you are waiting around while some exhausted coder hopes lightning strikes." The words settled into her chest with terrifying precision because part of her had already been thinking them for months. Back in Brooklyn that same night, Ethan sat alone inside the apartment surrounded by glowing monitors and half-finished coffee cups while rain tapped steadily against the fire escape outside. His phone rested beside the keyboard. No new messages. Still, he glanced toward it every few minutes anyway. Then his screen lit up unexpectedly. A photograph appeared from Claire's social media account before disappearing seconds later. But Ethan saw it long enough. Claire smiling beside Ryan beneath golden patio lights, her hand resting lightly against Ryan's chest. Champagne glasses raised between them while ocean waves blurred softly behind the picture. Ethan stared at the image for a long time without moving. Then quietly, almost carefully, he closed the laptop in front of him and leaned back into silence while the rain continued falling outside. When Claire returned to Brooklyn late Sunday night, the apartment was dark except for the faint blue glow coming from Ethan's desk. Rainwater still clung to her coat as she stepped quietly inside and closed the door behind her. For a moment, she simply stood there listening. The old radiator hissed softly near the kitchen. Traffic moved somewhere far below the apartment windows. Ethan sat in silence facing his laptop, shoulders slightly tense beneath his gray hoodie. He did not turn around immediately. Claire looked at him carefully, suddenly aware of how tired he seemed. Not weak, just worn down in a way she had stopped noticing months ago. "You are awake," she said softly. Ethan nodded once without looking away from the screen. "Could not sleep." Claire set her overnight bag near the couch and removed her heels slowly, buying herself time before speaking again. "How was your weekend?" Ethan finally asked. His tone remained calm. Too calm. Claire hated that. She would have preferred anger. Questions. Anything louder than this quiet restraint he always carried. "Fine," she answered carefully. "Busy." Ethan nodded again. Silence followed. Claire walked toward the kitchen and opened the refrigerator, spotting the iced coffee Ethan had made for her exactly where he said it would be. Somehow, that small detail hurt more than it should have. You did not have to do this, she murmured. I know. Ethan finally turned toward her then. His eyes looked exhausted but steady. Did you have fun with him? The question landed softly in the room, but Claire immediately felt defensive anyway. Why are you asking like that? Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair. Because I saw the picture. Claire's chest tightened. She crossed her arms automatically. It was just a photo. Ethan looked at her for a long moment before speaking again. Claire, he said quietly, are you leaving me? The words were so direct that for several seconds she could not answer at all. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows while somewhere upstairs a television played muffled laughter through thin apartment walls. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary life. Yet suddenly everything inside the room felt fragile. Claire looked away first. I do not know anymore. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly. That was the moment something changed between them. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly, like a thread pulling loose 1 inch at a time until eventually nothing remained holding two people together. Over the next few weeks, the distance between them widened until even small conversations became exhausting. Claire started staying out later after work. Ethan stopped asking when she would be home. Some nights, she woke at 2 in the morning and found him still sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by notebooks filled with code and diagrams she did not understand. Other nights, he would already be asleep on the couch with his laptop resting half open beside him while rain flickered against the windows behind his tired face. Once, around midnight, Claire walked into the apartment after dinner with Ryan and found Ethan reheating leftover soup alone in the kitchen. He glanced toward her with a faint, tired smile. There is food if you are hungry. Claire stared at him in disbelief. That is it, she snapped. You are not even going to ask where I was. Ethan slowly set down the spoon in his hand. Would it matter if I did? The question hit harder than shouting ever could have. Claire looked away first. You used to fight for me, she whispered bitterly. Ethan's expression barely changed. No, he said softly. I used to trust you. The silence afterward stretched painfully through the apartment. Claire felt heat rise behind her eyes, but pride kept her standing still. Ethan picked up his bowl quietly and moved toward the living room without another word. That night, Claire barely slept at all. The following Friday, Ryan invited her to a rooftop party in Manhattan attended by investors, influencers, and people who treated wealth like a second language. Glass walls overlooked the city skyline, while jazz music drifted softly beneath hanging lights. Claire wore a black dress Ryan had purchased for her earlier that week after casually noticing she had admired it in a store window. You deserve beautiful things, he told her. Nobody had said words like that to her in a long time. Around midnight, Ryan handed her another glass of champagne and smiled confidently. You know, he said, you look happier lately. Claire hesitated. Then her phone vibrated in her purse. Ethan's name appeared across the screen. Ryan noticed immediately. Still holding on to that situation? He asked lightly. Claire stared at the phone for several seconds while city lights reflected softly through the rooftop glass behind her. Then slowly, almost mechanically, she pressed decline. Somewhere across Brooklyn, Ethan lowered his phone from his ear and listened quietly to the automated voicemail message before ending the call. He sat alone inside the apartment while thunder rolled softly outside the windows, and the glow from his laptop illuminated a stack of legal documents spread across the kitchen table. At the very top rested a contract bearing numbers so large they barely looked real. The apartment smelled faintly like rain and burnt coffee the night Claire finally left. Outside, October wind rattled the loose metal fire escape against the brick building while distant traffic hummed through wet Brooklyn streets below. Ethan stood near the kitchen counter in silence, one hand resting lightly against the edge of the sink as Claire zipped the last of her clothes into a suitcase she had once bought during happier days together. Neither of them had raised their voices. Somehow that made everything feel worse. Quiet endings always did. Claire glanced around the apartment one last time. The small couch they found at a thrift store in Queens. The chipped coffee mug Ethan refused to throw away because she had painted his initials on it during their first Christmas together. The old bookshelf leaning slightly to one side because the floor beneath it was uneven. Tiny pieces of a life that once felt temporary in a hopeful way. Back when struggle felt romantic instead of exhausting. Ethan looked tired. More tired than angry. He had barely spoken since she walked through the door carrying the suitcase from the bedroom. You already made your decision, he said softly. Claire swallowed hard. I cannot keep living like this. Ethan nodded once. No argument. No dramatic plea. Just quiet understanding that somehow made guilt press heavier against her chest. Ryan has an apartment in Manhattan, she continued carefully. He thinks he can help me get better opportunities. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly before looking back at her. Do you love him? Claire hesitated too long, and both of them noticed it. Ethan gave the smallest nod, almost to himself more than her. I see. Rain tapped steadily against the windows. Somewhere downstairs, someone laughed loudly in the hallway before a door slammed shut. Life continuing as usual while theirs quietly ended inside 600 square feet of fading hope. Claire gripped the handle of her suitcase tighter. You make me feel like I am waiting for a future that never arrives, she whispered. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then finally, he spoke words Claire would remember for the rest of her life. I was building a life with you, he said quietly. You just got tired before the foundation finished drying. Claire felt tears sting her eyes immediately, but pride pushed her toward the door before regret could stop her. Ethan did not follow, did not beg. He simply stood there beneath the pale kitchen light, wearing the same gray hoodie she once used to steal from him on cold nights. I hope he gives you everything you are looking for, he said gently. Claire paused with one hand on the doorknob. For one dangerous second, she almost turned around, almost dropped the suitcase, almost chose the version of love that looked small now, but had once felt safe and real and honest. Then her phone buzzed with a message from Ryan downstairs. I am outside. Take your time. Claire closed her eyes briefly before opening the apartment door. Goodbye, Ethan. He nodded once. Goodbye, Claire. And that was it. No shattered glass. No screaming. Just a quiet door closing between two people who once thought they would spend forever together. Downstairs, Ryan waited beside a black luxury SUV parked beneath glowing streetlights slick with rain. The driver stepped out immediately to place Claire's suitcase into the trunk, while Ryan opened an umbrella over her head before she even reached the curb. Rough night, he asked softly as they slid into the warm leather interior. Claire stared through the rain-covered window toward the apartment building above them. Ethan's light was still on. Somewhere behind that window, he was probably sitting back down at his laptop already. Still working. Still believing in something she no longer understood. I am fine, she whispered. Ryan reached over and squeezed her hand confidently. You will thank yourself later. The SUV disappeared into Manhattan traffic while Ethan remained alone upstairs in the apartment that suddenly felt too quiet even for him. For several minutes, he did not move at all. Then slowly, he walked toward the kitchen table where the acquisition documents still rested beside his laptop. A private defense corporation had officially offered to purchase his artificial intelligence security platform earlier that afternoon for $0.8 billion. The final signatures were scheduled for Monday morning. Ethan stared at the paperwork silently before reaching for his phone. His business partner Daniel answered almost immediately. Please tell me you are finally celebrating tonight, Daniel said excitedly through the speaker. Do you realize what happens after Monday? Your name is going to be everywhere. Ethan looked toward the empty apartment doorway where Claire had stood only minutes earlier. Yeah, he answered quietly. I know. Daniel laughed. Brother, you are about to become one of the youngest tech billionaires in the country. Ethan lowered his eyes toward the engagement ring hidden inside the top drawer of the kitchen counter. He had bought it 3 weeks earlier after secretly saving for months despite barely spending money on himself. Simple. Platinum band. Oval diamond. Elegant without trying too hard. Claire once told him she hated flashy jewelry. Ethan stared at the ring for several long seconds before gently closing the drawer again. Funny timing, he murmured softly while rain continued falling outside the apartment windows. Monday morning arrived cold and gray over Manhattan. Rainwater still clung to the sidewalks while yellow taxis splashed through puddles beneath towering glass buildings that reflected the storm clouds above the city. Claire stood near the massive windows of Ryan's penthouse apartment, holding a cup of coffee she barely touched, while watching commuters hurry through the streets 20 floors below. Everything around her looked expensive, quiet, perfectly designed. The kind of place she once imagined successful people lived in before reality complicated the fantasy. Ryan stepped out of the bedroom, adjusting the cuffs of a navy suit that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly rent used to. You are up early, he said smoothly. Claire forced a small smile. Could not sleep. Ryan walked toward her confidently and kissed her forehead before taking his watch from the marble kitchen counter. "Big day today," he said casually. "Some tech acquisition everybody on Wall Street is talking about." Claire nodded absent-mindedly while staring out the window. Her chest still felt strangely heavy after leaving Brooklyn. Not regret exactly. At least that was what she kept telling herself. More like emotional whiplash from changing her entire life in one night. Ryan noticed her silence immediately. "You were thinking about him." Claire looked away. "No," Ryan gave a faint knowing smile. "Claire, men like Ethan do not move on quickly because men like Ethan build their entire identity around being needed." The words bothered her more than they should have. Because deep down, she knew Ryan did not understand Ethan at all. Ethan never needed to control people. That was part of what made leaving him feel strangely lonely already. Around noon, Claire arrived at the marketing agency where she worked part-time organizing luxury events. The office buzzed with unusual excitement. Phones rang constantly. Co-workers gathered around computer screens whispering about some major business announcement unfolding online. Claire barely paid attention at first until her friend Melissa suddenly gasped from across the room. "Oh my God," Melissa blurted loudly. "He is younger than I expected." Claire glanced up distractedly. "Who?" Melissa spun her monitor around immediately. "The tech founder everybody is talking about. Apparently his company just sold for almost $5 billion. Claire's eyes landed on the screen. Then the entire room around her seemed to disappear. Ethan stared back from the business article beneath bold headlines announcing the largest artificial intelligence security acquisition of the year. His photograph looked different somehow. Sharper. More composed. He wore a black suit she had never seen before while standing outside a Manhattan office tower surrounded by cameras and investors. Yet his expression remained exactly the same. Calm. Quiet. Almost uncomfortable with attention. Claire stopped breathing for a second. Melissa continued talking excitedly without noticing the color draining from Claire's face. His platform predicts cyber threats before they happen or something insane like that. They are calling him the next generation tech genius. Another coworker leaned over. Walker Technologies, right? Apparently, the founder owned most of the company himself. Claire stared at the article silently while numbers blurred together beneath Ethan's name. $4.8 billion. Interviews requested worldwide. Forbes cover speculation already beginning. Her hands suddenly felt cold. Ethan had done it. All those nights. All those endless hours in front of glowing computer screens while she rolled her eyes and accused him of chasing fantasies. He had actually done it. Melissa kept scrolling through the article. "Listen to this," she said. "It says he turned down interviews for almost a year while secretly finalizing negotiations. That is kind of hot, actually." Claire barely heard her. Memories crashed through her mind one after another. Ethan falling asleep at the kitchen table beside empty coffee cups. Ethan apologizing because he could not afford expensive vacations. Ethan quietly reheating soup for her after she ignored his calls. Ethan standing in the apartment doorway saying, "I was building a life with you." Claire gripped the edge of her desk harder. Suddenly, every moment looked different through this new reality. Every sacrifice. Every exhausted expression. Every quiet promise she dismissed because it did not look successful fast enough. Her phone buzzed unexpectedly inside her purse. Ryan's name appeared across the screen. Claire answered automatically. "Hey." Ryan sounded distracted. "Crazy morning, huh?" Claire swallowed hard. "You heard?" Ryan laughed softly. "Everybody heard. Wall Street has been obsessed with this acquisition since sunrise." Claire hesitated before speaking carefully. "Ryan, the founder." There was a brief silence on the line. Then Ryan answered calmly. "Yeah, I know who he is." Claire closed her eyes slowly. "You knew?" Ryan exhaled lightly. "Claire, I recognized his company name weeks ago." Her stomach dropped instantly. "Why would you not tell me?" Ryan's voice remained cool. "Because honestly, I did not think it mattered." Outside the office windows, Manhattan traffic crawled through gray afternoon rain while headlines about Ethan Walker spread across every financial screen in the city. And for the first time since leaving him, Claire finally understood what she had actually walked away from. For the next 3 weeks, Ethan Walker's face appeared everywhere. Financial magazines displayed him beneath bold headlines calling him the quiet billionaire reshaping the future of artificial intelligence. News anchors repeated the same phrases over and over again. Visionary founder. brilliant strategist, one of the youngest self-made tech billionaires in America. Claire heard his name so often that eventually it stopped sounding real. Yet somehow, the strangest part was not Ethan's success. It was the way he handled it. No flashy interviews. No luxury social media posts. No arrogant celebrations. While other tech founders flooded the internet showing private jets and champagne parties, Ethan stayed almost invisible outside formal business appearances. The world finally noticed him, but he still behaved like the same quiet man who used to make iced coffee in a tiny Brooklyn kitchen at 6 in the morning. That made everything harder for Claire. One Thursday evening, she sat alone inside Ryan's penthouse apartment while Manhattan glowed beneath the floor-to-ceiling windows around her. Rain drifted softly against the glass again, turning the city lights blurry and distant. Ryan had not come home yet. Lately, he rarely did before midnight. Claire stared at her phone while another article about Ethan filled the screen. This time, reporters photographed him leaving a charity fundraiser in Manhattan beside several government officials and investors. Ethan wore a simple black coat over a charcoal suit, one hand tucked quietly into his pocket while cameras flashed around him. He looked calm, untouchable almost. But Claire noticed something nobody else would have recognized. He still wore the old silver watch she gave him during their second anniversary. Her chest tightened instantly. Ryan finally walked into the apartment around 11, carrying his phone and briefcase while loosening his tie with one hand. "You are still awake?" he asked distractedly. Claire lowered the phone slowly. "Can I ask you something?" Ryan glanced toward the kitchen. "Depends. Is it going to become emotional?" The answer irritated her immediately. "Did you know Ethan's company was worth that much before I left him?" Ryan sighed softly like someone already tired of a conversation before it truly began. "Claire, companies like his are always a gamble until contracts close. That is not what I asked." Ryan tossed his keys onto the marble counter. "Fine. Yes. I knew his platform had potential." Claire stared at him in disbelief. "And you still let me walk away from him without saying anything?" Ryan gave a short, humorless laugh. "You talk like I stole you. You manipulated me." "No." Ryan finally looked directly at her. "I showed you reality. You chose what kind of future you wanted." Claire crossed her arms tightly. "You called him a broke dreamer." Ryan shrugged without apology. At the time, that was true. Silence settled heavily through the apartment. Somewhere below them, car horns echoed faintly through rainy Manhattan streets, while thunder rolled softly in the distance. Ryan loosened his cuffs slowly before speaking again. "Look, Claire, let us stop pretending this is about money now. If Ethan was still unknown, you would not suddenly miss him this much." The words landed hard because part of her feared they might be true. Ryan noticed the hesitation in her face immediately. "Exactly," he said quietly. Claire looked away first. "That is not fair." Ryan walked toward the kitchen bar and poured himself a drink. "Fair," he repeated calmly. "You left him because you were tired of waiting for potential to become real. Now it became real, and suddenly you are rewriting history in your head." Claire felt tears burn behind her eyes immediately. "You do not understand him." Ryan sipped his drink slowly. "No, you just did not understand him soon enough." The apartment fell silent again after that. Cold, polite, empty. Later that night, Claire lay awake alone in the massive bedroom while city lights moved faintly across the ceiling above her. Ryan had fallen asleep quickly beside her, one arm resting across expensive white sheets that somehow still felt less comforting than Ethan's tiny apartment ever did. Around 2 in the morning, Claire quietly slipped out of bed and walked barefoot toward the living room. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows while the city glowed silver beneath storm clouds. She opened her phone again almost without thinking. Ethan's latest interview clip appeared instantly. A reporter asked him the same question everyone seemed obsessed with lately. "What kept you motivated during the years before success?" Ethan smiled faintly before answering. "Believing in something before the world does can get lonely sometimes." Claire stopped breathing for a second, because she remembered exactly when he said those words before. 2 years earlier. Brooklyn rooftop. Cheap takeout containers between them while helicopters drifted above the skyline at sunset. Ethan had looked at her quietly and said, "The hardest part about building something is surviving long enough for people to finally understand what you saw from the beginning." Back then, Claire kissed him and promised she would always stay beside him. Now she stood alone inside a luxury penthouse, realizing success had not changed Ethan nearly as much as failure had changed her. By the time winter settled over Manhattan, Claire and Ryan barely resembled a couple anymore. Their conversations had become polite exchanges between two people sharing expensive square footage instead of a life. Ryan traveled constantly now. Chicago one week, Miami the next. When he was home, he spent more time on conference calls than speaking to her directly. Claire stopped pretending not to notice. One snowy Thursday evening, she returned from work to find the penthouse unusually quiet. No music, no television, just the low hum of city traffic far below the windows, while snow drifted softly through the dark sky outside. Claire removed her coat slowly and noticed a folded envelope resting on the kitchen counter beside Ryan's watch collection. Her name was written neatly across the front. She opened it carefully. "Claire, I think we both know this stopped being real a while ago. You are still emotionally somewhere else, and honestly, I am too. There is no dramatic reason. No betrayal. Just timing and truth. The apartment is paid through the end of the month. Take whatever time you need. Ryan." Claire lowered the letter slowly while silence filled the enormous penthouse around her. No screaming. No tears. Just emptiness. Strange how relationships that begin with excitement often end with exhaustion instead of heartbreak. Outside, snow continued falling gently across Manhattan while headlights drifted below like blurred rivers of gold. Claire sat down alone at the marble kitchen island and stared toward the city for a very long time. Somewhere during the past few months, she had convinced herself that if Ethan ever became successful, everything would suddenly make sense. That maybe she would feel justified somehow. But instead, the opposite happened. The more successful Ethan became, the more clearly she saw who he had already been before money ever entered the picture. Kind, patient, loyal, quietly devoted in ways she had mistaken for weakness. Her phone buzzed softly against the counter. Melissa's name flashed across the screen. "Please tell me you are coming tonight," Melissa said immediately after Claire answered. "I seriously need help with this gala setup disaster." Claire rubbed her forehead tiredly. "What gala?" "The Walker Foundation charity event tomorrow night." Claire froze instantly. Melissa continued speaking without noticing. "The hotel completely changed the ballroom layout last minute, and everybody is panicking because half of Manhattan is attending, including Ethan Walker himself apparently." Claire closed her eyes slowly. Ethan. Even hearing his name out loud still affected her physically somehow. "I do not think that is a good idea," she admitted quietly. Melissa sighed dramatically. "Claire, you literally organize luxury events for a living. I need you. Also, it is just work. Just work." Claire almost laughed at how impossible that sounded. Yet the next evening, she still found herself standing inside the Grand Astoria Hotel ballroom again, while workers rushed around hanging lights and adjusting floral arrangements beneath enormous crystal chandeliers. Snow drifted softly outside the towering windows while jazz music played quietly through hidden speakers overhead. Everything looked elegant, expensive, perfect. Claire focused on work carefully, trying not to think about why her heartbeat kept speeding up every few minutes. Then suddenly, the entire energy inside the ballroom shifted. People straightened instinctively. Conversations lowered. Ethan had arrived. Claire looked up before she could stop herself. He walked into the ballroom wearing a dark tailored coat dusted lightly with snowflakes that melted against the fabric under the warm lights. Still calm, still composed, yet somehow even more distant than before. Success had not made Ethan arrogant. It had simply made the world finally move around him differently. Several investors approached him immediately, laughing too loudly at things that were barely jokes, while photographers lingered nearby, pretending not to stare. Ethan handled all of it politely, but Claire noticed something familiar in his expression. Fatigue. The kind hidden beneath professionalism. As if attention itself exhausted him. Then Ethan's eyes found hers across the ballroom. Time seemed to pause for one unbearable second. Claire forgot the music, forgot the crowd, forgot how to breathe normally. Ethan looked surprised at first. Then his expression softened almost imperceptibly. No anger, no coldness, just quiet recognition again. He excused himself from the investors surrounding him and walked toward her slowly, while snow continued drifting beyond the ballroom windows behind him. Claire's pulse thundered painfully inside her chest. "Hi, Claire." His voice sounded exactly the same. Soft, Steady. Familiar enough to break something inside her instantly. Claire swallowed hard. Hi. Ethan glanced briefly toward the floral arrangements beside her. You organized this? She nodded carefully. Partially. Ethan gave a small approving smile while looking around the ballroom. It looks beautiful. That was all. No mention of the past. No bitterness. No questions about Ryan. Somehow his kindness hurt worse than anger ever could have. Claire lowered her eyes briefly before speaking. Congratulations, Ethan. He studied her quietly for a second. Thank you. Snow tapped gently against the windows while orchestra music drifted softly overhead. The entire ballroom shimmered with warmth and wealth and golden light. Yet standing beside Ethan again felt strangely similar to standing inside their tiny Brooklyn apartment years ago. Familiar in the most dangerous way possible. Claire finally looked up at him fully. You changed the entire world, she whispered softly. Ethan's expression remained calm. No, he answered gently. The world just finally noticed. The gala ended just after midnight. One by one, Manhattan's elite disappeared into black luxury cars waiting beneath softly falling snow, while hotel staff quietly cleared champagne glasses from linen-covered tables inside the ballroom. Claire stood near the towering windows overlooking Park Avenue, watching snowflakes drift through the city lights like slow-moving stars. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass. Tired eyes, forced elegance, regret she could no longer hide from herself. Somewhere behind her, the orchestra packed away instruments while workers dimmed the chandeliers one section at a time. The night was ending, yet Claire still felt suspended inside something unfinished. You always liked snow. Ethan's voice came softly from behind her. Claire turned slowly. He had removed his suit jacket now, sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms while exhaustion lingered quietly beneath his calm expression. Somehow, seeing him look slightly less polished made him feel more familiar again. More dangerous to her heart. Claire gave a faint smile. You remembered that? Ethan slipped his hands into his pockets lightly. You used to drag me onto the roof every first snowfall. Claire laughed quietly despite herself. You complained every time. Because it was freezing. You still came with me. Ethan looked at her for a moment before answering softly. Yeah. Silence settled gently between them while snow continued drifting outside the windows. The kind of silence that belonged to people who once knew each other deeply enough to speak without words. Claire lowered her eyes first. Ryan moved out, she admitted quietly. Ethan's expression barely changed. I am sorry. The sincerity in his voice made her chest ache immediately. You do not have to pretend to feel bad for me. Ethan frowned slightly. I am not pretending. Of course he was not. That was the problem. Ethan had never been cruel enough to enjoy someone else's pain. Even now. Even after everything. Claire looked down at her hands carefully. I spent months convincing myself I made the right choice, she whispered. I told myself I wanted certainty. Stability. Someone successful. Ethan stayed quiet. Claire swallowed hard before continuing. Then you became everything I thought I wanted. Ethan's gaze softened slightly, but he still said nothing. And somehow, she admitted painfully, it only made me realize how badly I misunderstood you. Outside, snow tapped gently against the glass while traffic lights reflected silver and gold across wet Manhattan streets below. Ethan stepped closer slowly, not enough to touch her, just enough for his voice to lower naturally. Claire, he said quietly, you did not leave because I was poor. She looked up at him immediately. Ethan held her gaze steadily. You left because you stopped believing in me before I had the chance to prove you right. Tears burned instantly behind Claire's eyes. Because deep down, she knew that was true. The money had only exposed the mistake more clearly. It had not created it. Why are you being so kind to me? She whispered shakily. Ethan smiled faintly. Sadness flickered through it this time. Because loving someone does not disappear just because they hurt you. Claire looked away quickly as tears finally slipped free despite her efforts to hold them back. I do not deserve that. Ethan nodded once, almost agreeing. Maybe not. The honesty of the answer somehow hurt less than false comfort would have. Claire laughed weakly through tears while shaking her head. You know what the worst part is? Ethan stayed silent. I thought success would change you. Her voice trembled softly now. But it just made everyone else finally see the person you already were. Ethan looked down briefly, almost uncomfortable with the words. That humility still existed inside him too, even after billions of dollars. even after the entire world learned his name. Claire wiped at her eyes quickly. "Did you ever hate me?" she asked quietly. Ethan thought about the question for several long seconds while snow continued falling beyond the windows behind them. Finally, he answered honestly. "No." Claire stared at him in disbelief. Ethan gave a faint, tired smile. "I was disappointed, hurt, lonely." He paused gently. "But hate takes energy I never really had." The ballroom lights dimmed further overhead, leaving only soft golden pools of light across the empty marble floor now. Somewhere near the entrance, hotel staff quietly stacked chairs while jazz music faded into silence. Claire looked at Ethan standing beside her and suddenly remembered something she had forgotten for far too long. Real love had never been loud with him. It lived in smaller places. Coffee left in the refrigerator after long shifts. Late-night subway rides just to walk her home safely. The way he always listened completely whenever she spoke, even when exhausted. She once mistook quiet love for ordinary love. That was her greatest mistake. Ethan glanced toward the snowy street outside before looking back at her one final time. "I should go." Claire's chest tightened instantly. "Ethan," he waited calmly. She opened her mouth, searching desperately for words big enough to fix years of misunderstanding. But nothing came. Because some losses become permanent long before people realize they are happening. Ethan seemed to understand anyway. He gave her one last gentle smile before turning toward the ballroom exit. Claire watched him walk away slowly beneath the fading golden lights while snow continued falling outside Manhattan's dark winter sky. He never looked back. And somehow, that was when she finally understood the truth. She did not lose him when he became rich. She lost him the moment she failed to see his value before the world applauded him for it.